No, we can't do this unscripted. Summoning were an Austrian black metal band that formed in the...
Black metal is post-catastrophe music. In this, more than anything, it represented a clear break with the past. Whilst death metal might have frantically gestured at the limits of a society organised around liberal democracy, black metal assumed its failure had already occurred and sought meaning beyond the collapse. Novel as black metal was in this regard, it embedded a planned obsolescence from the outset, one that its key players were well aware of. This Lysat Tar'os probably came the closest to synthesizing its apocalypticism with mature optimism alive to the realities of a post-decline existence. But the Burzum moment was just that, the briefest glimpse of a possible future never to be fully realized. Following this, black metal essentially split in two. Plagued on the one hand by the knowledge of its own increasing obsolescence, propped up on the other as a still viable art form, maybe just in need of a little house training. The conflict became firmly entrenched by the early 2000s, caused in large part by third wave black metal, which was primarily a product of the USA and Western Europe, embracing the logic of free market capitalism. It saw black metal as a vehicle for individualism, self-expression, self-help. This was a process of mainstreaming that could only be achieved by redefining black metal as an aesthetic form instead of a compositional one. The third wave of black metal was therefore essentially a movement in modern rock, draping itself in the garments of black metal while stubbornly clinging to the optimism inherent to the liberal psyche. In order to wear the clothes of second wave black metal whilst rejecting its basic premise, however, the third wave felt duty-bound to rehabilitate the music. Rehabilitate the music. Mark its homework, salvage it from the clutches of a fanbase they deemed to be closed-minded and problematic. This has left an array of open sores. In the press, this is presented as a seemingly intractable disagreement, reduced to phrases like traditionalist, elitist, or purist. These proxies lazily characterize the debate as a simple binary between backward fans hostile to new ideas and fans that are open and worldly. Beneath the buzzwords, however, the real stakes of this conflict are about longevity. How does one code longevity into music that has planned obsolescence written into its very DNA? Third wave black metal champions answer this by pointing to the plethora of black metal since the mid-2000s, from post-black metal to black gaze to the many permutations of avant-garde black metal. Skeptics deny these forms of continuity black metal as false prophets, warm diarrhea to be injected directly into your eyeball, or aberrations that give too much ground to the requirements of rockist optimism. This simmering tension defines the landscape of the modern scene, it still does. Feature, not a bug. But is this debate as irreconcilable as it first appears? Both sides generally agree that there is something special about this music, something worth preserving. They're both motivated by the underlying assumption that longevity is desirable and achievable, at least in theory, even if disagreement persists over the validity of how this is played out in practice. With that in mind then, perhaps the balm for these sores has been hiding in plain sight for some 3 decades now, in the form of one's summoning.
See, I told you I get along to it, and that's...
Along with Abgor, Summoning are the most well-known alumnus of Austria's short-lived and fanatically eccentric Black Circle, known as the Black Metal Syndicate. Like, seriously, have you listened to some of the other bands from this scene? Just
do it.
Beneath the notorious idiosyncrasies of these artists, they tended to supplement the tremolo-driven winter activism, yep, that's what I'm calling it, of their Nordic peers with a jagged melodicism, defined by a marked medievalism and frantic, almost manic outbursts of energetic poise. Dense but taut, veering from cadential phrasing to a fraught tonal ambiguity which allowed it to dance around the idea of optimism, hint at it, tease at it. Ooh! The violent spirit of black metal was retained, but tempered by a strict loyalty to traditional harmonic forms. This was a sonic expression of what could broadly be characterized as heroism in the Homeric sense, this meaning a form of optimism in the truest sense of the word, stirring and motivational certainly, but not reducible to these things. The heroism of summoning has little use for an individual's sense of purpose in life. Rather, it took the process of world-building to an extreme that black metal had thus far not achieved, maybe with the exception of the Hellenic scene. The individual is placed within a vast environment on a summoning album, free to roam and explore at will, but beholden to events greater than themselves, offering us the opportunity to contextualize atomized experiences within a wider whole. Adding conceptual meat to these metaphorical bones, summoning married this latent heroism with its most obvious scholar, one Jar Tolkien. Leaning on such a significant body of work gave the music a near limitless well of narrative material to draw upon. But whilst their ability to give voice to Tolkien's world is unmatched, and I'm including Howard Shore in this claim, summoning's music is more compelling if we perhaps approach it not from the programmatic direction, meaning treating it as a soundtrack to non-musical phenomena, but as music in and of itself. Summoning's unique contribution was to supplement the vast, sweeping, impersonal perspective of black metal with a heroic optimism. This bypassed the inherently intractable duality by denying the finality of the second wave and the individualized self-help ethos of the third wave in one fell swoop. To put it facetiously, they gave black metal the gift of a viable shelf life which no one had managed to do before. The debut was their most characteristically Austrian moment, a frantic, feral cacophony of galloping black metal, barbaric yet melodically refined. Lugbers is sometimes dismissed as a false start. It clearly resided within the shadow of their Nordic influences and was the only summoning album to feature real drums. But following that, they only had to punch the information in once. Hey, am I right? Drummers, eh? Drummers. What? But it established the cyclical repetitions, adding subtle variations with each recapitulation, which later became a summoning hallmark, here articulated through razor-sharp guitar lines instead of their signature keyboards. Following the anomalous Lugbers, the summoning discography can roughly be segmented into 3 eras. Era 1 covers 1995's Minas Morgul, the first real summoning album, Dol Guldur and the Nightshade Forest EP in 1997, together arguably constituting their peak as a creative entity. This body of work laid the foundation of summoning lore. It established their unmistakable compositional and philosophical hallmarks, and set them apart as a truly unique entity in the canon of late 90s black metal. Slow but purposeful, ponderous, at times flowery yet capable of great darkness, rich in thematic import but elegantly simple in execution. Sorry, I just came. But these albums embedded a contradiction at the heart of their approach. Summoning contrived a boundless open space for the listener to wander through, but the means of its production were a paragon of bedroom black metal, of the home studio. The programmed drums freed them from the harsh realities of the rehearsal room, let alone a gig circuit. Era 1, more than any, is haunted by artificiality, an unreality of synthesized instrumentation and percussion, shockingly plastic reproductions of everything from harpsichords to brass ensembles. Their music, like all good black metal, transcended these limited means for sure, but for all the sense of scale conjured, the proverbial sausage-making of summoning was insular and claustrophobic, averse to the extroverted quest metal philosophy that was emanating from these very, very insular raw materials. Era 2 traces 1999's Stronghold through to 2006's Oathbound, accommodating the relatively left-field pop folk of Let Mortal Heroes Sing Your Fame. These albums are all highly distinctive in their own right, but that's precisely the point. Establishing an artistic identity is one thing, but developing it is entirely another. And this can lead to all manner of fascinating deviations. Both members began taking in a wide array of influences, most obviously expressed through their side projects. The martial ambience of Salinis Kurzgost, the dark wave of Protectus Die Verbentum Kinder S. I'm just fucking sorry, German-speaking world, at the EBM light of his Ice Ages project. These and other neofolk divergences began to bleed into the summoning format, and on 3 occasions, these cross-pollinations achieved a facsimile of success. Each album falls short of blazing an entirely new path, maybe, but all 3 were strong statements on their own terms, whilst revealing new and unique conceptual avenues, ripe for exploration. After a lengthy hiatus, their third and final era, at the time of recording at least, covers 2013's Old Morning's Dawn, and most recently 2018's With Doom We Come. In one sense, this constitutes a system reset. In another, this is an attempt at modernization. The budget may be bigger, and with it the dynamics, range of timbres, technical complexity, and overall fluidity of the compositions. The folk elements reach for a very contemporary authenticity. But ultimately, these albums still speak the same language as Era 1. Summoning were responding to a contemporary desire for authenticity. The folk elements are clearly reaching for a more organic, naturalist sheen. Far cry from the jaunty artificiality of their first era, which, in a post-war Druuna landscape, was gradually consigned to the charming category. They craft a slick, textural offering capable of competing with modern metal's cinematic, sincere, polished emotiveness. Despite this, however, the initial magic of Summoning was retained. As my podcasting buddy Tyler characterized it, they still managed to evoke the feeling of wandering through a world you have never visited and yet somehow miss. But far from a balance sheet of successes and failures, their body of work should instead be viewed as a thesis on black metal as longevity. Not simply a consistent band with a long career behind them, but one that demonstrated how black metal can reach forward, stabilize, and evolve whilst remaining loyal to its unique, post-catastrophic origins. But few have taken up the call. Summoning have their followers, certainly, from clones such as Kaladin Brood and Emin Meal, an impassable labyrinth of razor-sharp rocks, to intellectual ancestors in the likes of Midnight Odyssey, Druadan Forest, or Obsequia. I mean, this is especially when you've got the whiskey down, yeah. To a loose collection of bright but content-light folk in the form of Sawa, Sewa, Sao, Sia, Eldamar, and Sojourner. But similar to Darkthrone's populous offspring, the majority of these artists understand summoning on an aesthetic level rather than a spiritual one. Ironically, the most accurate practitioners of their legacy remains the scattered digital micro-scene that is Dungeon Synth. But Summoning's career presents black metal with as many challenges as it does possible futures. For one, the contradictions between the naturalist spirit and the artificial means of production. But this may not be as intractable as it first appears. All art, to varying degrees, must contend with a discord between the means of its production and the message it attempts to convey. For second, many still dismiss them as mere soundtrack fodder for the works of Tolkien, although Summoning remain an entirely separate artistic prospect. Living in the long shadow of a more significant and complex cultural institution makes forging meanings from their music outside of this shadow all the more challenging. For third, their music has a tendency to inspire nothing more than naive escapism over genuine spiritual yearning in many fans. And this is a duality that Summoning have deliberately never really resolved or reconciled themselves to. And I'd argue that in refusing to resolve this tension, it fuels their underlying profundity. The skill and duration with which Summoning have managed to thread this needle makes them truly unique. In purely utilitarian terms, if nothing else then, their idiosyncratic approach to black metal provides such an obvious roadmap away from second wave black metal's planned obsolescence. It remains a wonder that, aside from a small crowd of imitators, very few have seriously attempted to grapple with this legacy.